Anybody can take somebody around. Anybody can push paper. Most anybody can negotiate. But to dig in on the use case, individualized for that person, right? Or that aggregate of people, those are special skills. And clinical people have that.
Welcome to the Real Estate Mogul MD podcast. Thanks for tuning in and taking control of your financial future. This is a show where we not only motivate and inspire, we give you actionable, real-world experience to help you live life by design. You'll hear journeys and stories from other physicians, investors, coaches, consultants, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, Brett Riggins. From heart doctor to realtor, today's guest is a cardiologist, national medical executive, business consultant, and real estate professional. He is passionate to help you find your happy place in real estate. Please welcome Dr. David Reis to the show. All right, here we are, another show. Dr. David Reis. Am I saying that properly before we even get started here? Dr. David Reis, welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you, Brett. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for heightening the conversation for my colleague clinicians to think about how to generate wealth and sustainability in a very turbulent industry.
Yeah, and I was so excited doing a little research on you and actually seeing how we're connected. I typically will ask and make sure I'm pronouncing the name right, so I skipped that part of my process. I'm glad I stumbled on it and said the right way. You probably get that pronounced a few different ways, right?
I do.
What's the funnest way you've heard?
I always answer.
Yeah. Right. Is there a funnest way?
So the Portuguese people will say Reis, and the name means king in Portuguese.
Oh, nice.
The Eastern European people will say Reis. Most people will spell it incorrectly, but I answer. So whatever you call me, I'm good.
And how do you say it?
Reis.
Reis.
Yes,
very cool. Dr. David Reis. Very, very cool. Like I say, I was excited doing a little background research on you on how we're actually connected, a lot closer than what we thought.
Yeah.
Before we get there, tell us a little bit about your background as a physician, like where you started and where you're at now.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. And I would say that our conversation will apply to all clinicians. This is not really a discussion that is limited to physicians. So hello to all my physician assistant, nurse practitioner, colleagues, generally speaking, across the supply chain of people who provide care and support care. So I am, by my first of four careers, an interventional cardiologist. I was in the generation of people at the very beginning of stent and angioplasty. I pursued patents to no avail. That is to say, that's an attestation of my lack of knowledge about business as I started the career. So, of course, I spent a lot of money on patent lawyers for concepts that ultimately were commercialized and delivered to the market by Johnson & Johnson and Medtronic and St. Jude. So that big test was, do I have an inventive mind? So it cost me a lot of money to learn that lesson, but it suited me well ultimately. So I started private practice in 1989 on day one, July 1, 1989, I got a letter from one of the HMOs that was addressed, Dear Vendor. So can you imagine going through all of that training thinking I am a doctor, and in fact, what the system speak was I was a vendor. That did not bounce off, right? That really hit me at the core. And, now I'm retired after 32 years in practice, and I'm in my 13th year of doing real estate. Extemporaneously, that comes right to top of mind. So hello to all my colleagues. You're all vendors. Okay. So with being a vendor comes a narrative about having to have a business model, having to be open to change and adaptable, and ultimately always finding, proving, and innovating your value. So that is to say, the practice of medicine or the industry of providing clinical services is not static. And that's before we get to AI, right? So anyone who runs a clinical services delivery business should have on their mind, what's my value today? What's my value tomorrow? How will I be replaced? And how do I find sustainable revenue above and beyond that core business called That Thing I Do. So that's what got me intrigued in real estate. I've had 4 careers on purpose. Halfway through my clinical career, I left the operating room so that I could travel the country as a Fortune 500 consulting executive. Did that for 8 years. Then I went into national utilization review, all while keeping my practice open, but I kept my practice open pro bono. I didn't take any money out of that because making money in clinical private practice has so much complexity, so much overhead, and for me, ultimately was demoralizing. It wasn't worth the bandwidth attributable to try to jump through those hoops. I was happier just taking care of people for free. So I went into business to make my money. So one of your questions is, what is your great achievement, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't have the question list in front of me, but Doc, what's your great achievement? My great achievement was keeping my mind open, right? So I think one of the biggest traps for clinicians generally is that the task list is so intense and the number of interveners so sapping of your resources that ultimately you go down a rabbit hole called That Thing I Do, and you lose sight of all of the world, right? And all of the opportunities for very bright-minded people. That being said, statistically, the number of clinicians that have side hustles, so to speak, is about 20%, right? And that's published data, in the medical literature. So back in the early 80s, there were laws passed called the Stark laws that prevented people who owned clinical businesses from cannibalizing, if you will, their clinical practice to support other entities. And that really destroyed a lot of innovative mojo for clinicians. So the sidestep around that was really to own ambulatory surgery centers and try to make money off of the procedures from the facility fee. I never wanted to go in that direction, so much so I was in private practice. And when I was approached by a major nationally noted university system to buy out my practice, I had a moral ethical dilemma. I was one guy and I had the opportunity to bring a university system to my town, and I thought better of it because I had other colleagues in private practice, and ultimately they would have gotten squashed, right? So I said, you know what, let me just stay put, right? Be a solo practitioner. Boy, that hurt, right? So I was on call 24/7, 365. Oh. So while real estate is really complex and really contentious and really competitive with emotional ups and downs and dealing with all sorts of client management stuff, it's much easier than being in solo practice. Mm-hmm. So ask me another question.
So interesting. All that stuff rolling through there, David, the first thing that popped out, those things that you worked on prior to leaving medicine, and the first time, the patent stuff. Is that stuff that went through? You said J&J and some of these other companies actually developed some of that stuff. Was that the stuff that you worked on that went through, or
right. I was in a very preliminary phase, but the value of that is now I'm involved in healthy living concepts and involving manufactured housing and land use to create affordable senior elder retiree solutions in country and expat. So the value of those experiences was to develop an engineering mind, right? And my counsel to all of my dear clinical colleagues is that if you're going to get involved in secondary careers, or you're going to get involved in projects for which you want to generate passive income, annuitized income, turnaround income, the world of flipping, if you will, you have to be an engineer. So you have to practice, and the clinicians will know this, Six Sigma engineering. Six Sigma is a concept where in order for you to get the goal that you anticipate, you have to know your procedures and all the contingencies and all the workarounds 6 steps down from where you're operating at currently. So that is to say, clinicians are ideally suited to work in real estate if they can embrace creativity, social media communication, client management, and handle the disparity between, wait a second, are you a real estate professional or are you my clinician? Right? So there's a real separation, if you will, that has to go on. That being said, I think real estate absolutely is for clinical people. So at the end, you're going to say, what can this show do for me? Right? So I'll jump to that and then jump back. If you have any interest in developing a real estate career, I would love to speak with you. Visit my YouTube, RE Career Doctor, or my website, recareerdoctor.com. The diligence, commitment, non-judgmental nature, stick-to-itiveness, big picture thinking, longitudinal thinking of clinicians is absolutely ideally suited to real estate, especially when finding trapped value or seeing use case outcomes that other people don't. Clinicians and real estate, 100%.
Six Sigma, huh? So I'm on the outsider, Dave. I'm the outsider looking in. I'm not a clinician.
Well, we know each other. So you know what?
Yeah.
We'll go offline at this, and I'll make you a Six Sigma black belt before
that's
you.
Awesome. Six Sigma. No, that's awesome. That is like the ultimate chess player, right? The Six Sigma effect. Knowing like the moves that are happening or could happening down line.
Yeah.
When you say real estate career, what do you mean, David?
So a real estate career is so polymorphic. It's whatever you want it to. The great question, what you want it to be. So most people will think, hi, I'm your agent. Let's get in the car. Let's go look around. Right. That is the narrowest interpretation. So a career in real estate involves understanding valuation, understanding data, understanding zoning, understanding development, supply, demand, wealth management, legal issues. So it's everything is everything, so to speak, right? So the licensure is the common portal, but what people do with it, that's what becomes the unique use case. So real estate is whatever you want it to be. At the end of the day, being in real estate is a lifestyle thing. So I took on a career path where I can go anywhere in the world. And part of the reason I'm at the firm that I'm at is specifically for that kind of global network. I can go anywhere and have it be a business development opportunity, not so much for the tax deductibility perspective, but quality of living, cost of living, healthful living is something that's everywhere. So I'm deeply involved in multiple countries around the world where culture of aging is, simply stated, much better than it is in the U.S. It is really hard to age well in the U.S. It's cost intensive, and our general mindset is procedures rather than preventive. So other countries,
the world of insurance is kind of like fighting that same way. As you learned quickly that you were a vendor, David. The world of insurance in which we all kind of live our lives around is reactive, is not proactive. It's almost conditioned so deeply within us from the big money sectors,
There is no doubt that quality of life year, and that's a real thing in medical statistics. It's got a funny nickname. It's called a QALY, QALY, quality of life year. We are not, as a system in the U.S., focused so much on that as we are on a claim. The insurance terminology is a claims made system. So why wouldn't I, if my family could tolerate it, and certainly telemedicine, that's easy. Why wouldn't I move to a place where I could live on the beach, get occupational physical therapy, cognitive therapy 3 times a day, be ultimately well fed? Okay. Why wouldn't I do that versus getting stuck here in the U.S.? And I think that will resonate for my colleague clinicians. To me, that is a way of the future. So there are competitive places all around the globe, because at the end of the day, elder care, senior care is labor intensive. And in the U.S., our labor costs and our liability situation makes for a cost structure that most people can't afford to live well. That's a mess. Right. So for me, I took everything I learned from tragic, chronic clinical care and the insurance industry and the regulatory aspects of the healthcare industry. And I wrap that all up to become a real estate person that people can go to. Hey, Dr. Reis, you know what? I'm a mess, right? And I'm a mess and I'm stuck and I can't afford my life and my qualities are going down the drain. What can we work out? Well, no problem. Let's do a needs wants analysis. Let's really check this out. And let's get in touch with colleagues in 10 different locations and find out where you would be best suited. So AI in this construct, it's a beautiful thing. Telemedicine, a beautiful thing. So when I was in medical school, there were no handheld computers, right? So I'm of that generation that people learned with their head, not learned with their keyboard, right? In today's world, you can be anywhere on the face of the globe and be plugged in, so to speak. So, state of consciousness about what represents your quality of life, consumers, right? And what is the family dynamic along the time continuum of aging? These are discussions that real estate professionals have the opportunity to have. And I'm fortunate to have colleagues anywhere and everywhere that call me up and say, can you please join this conversation? I don't have the clinical chops to have this conversation. Dr. Reis, come into this conversation and let's build a program, if you will. So back to your question, real estate is anything you want it to be. For clinicians, in the simplest iteration, I bought a multifamily house. I'm the landlord. I hired a property manager and I pick up my check each month, the passive income system. More sophisticated than that is I have a group of colleagues and we pooled our money and we bought a large piece of land and we're putting in a development of which we are the principals, and we outsource to a developer, and maybe we've got equity and maybe one of us are going to have the premium one that's on the lake or on the river because I like to trout fish, right? So go ahead, ask another question.
I let you go. I let you go because it's men, the experience. You're very well articulated. The way that you speak, you got the chops, Dr. Reis. You got the chops for sure. No, you
used a great word. So I'm articulate, right? Yeah. Being well articulated is somebody who had a knee replacement and a hip replacement.
Articulate,
right?
Yeah.
Right. But that raises an issue of how we rehab in this country, right? So I'm involved in projects where people go for long stay rehab, right? It doesn't make sense to get chemotherapy or a joint replacement and have the system say, adios, amigo, we're finished with you. Go home. We'll see you in a week. For me, my mindset, and I ran Yale University's outpatient cardiac rehab center where the transplant patients went to get put back together, and took that program from disarray to national certification for service excellence. We rehab and heal from a quality of living perspective, what I would say negligently in this country. That's a labor cost. So why wouldn't you long stay or permanent residency? And my thesis overall is I think we're going from I've got a 30 or a 40-year mortgage. This is where they're going to have my 80th birthday party. It's the same place where I raised the kids. I think we're going to become not nomadic, I wouldn't say that, and not migratory, but I think the concept of where one lives is going to become a very fluid calculation.
Yeah.
Aside from mortgage rates, aside from supply demand, the thought process for certainly the American consumer is going to be, what's my environment? What's my living experience? Right. And I don't really care whether it's manufactured housing or it is aesthetically, architecturally, right, vintage. Right. I think people want to live their experience, not live their housing.
Yeah. There's along with that. I mean, I can speak personally from transplanting, from where I was raised, where all of my family is at, to now a better place, because just like you say, I I want to be somewhere that makes me feel that way, right? It makes me why wouldn't I want to be on the beach? Why would I want to be somewhere? Although you're in the north right now, I believe, northeast, David, but I don't want to see snow anymore unless I go and trip to it. So why would I stay somewhere where I don't want to be? Well, the answer is family and conditioning and resources. It's mindset, where we feel like we're stuck in these places so much that we don't even give ourselves the opportunity to think elsewhere. But you're saying that this trend is coming, not the nomadic trend, but just this idea of we are starting to remove these self-made limitations in our brains that are keeping us stuck in certain places, living in the boxes of this reactive versus proactive care and mindset.
100 million gajillion %. So for me, my orientation to snow, I'm good with one of those little glass shake snow things. I want the beach. But if you look at our world, what's going on now, right? And again, just to lock in this conversation to time frame, we've got the UAW on strike. Why? Because these hardworking people don't have enough cash to afford their lives, right? And they're going to take it to the mat on this. So if you look at U.S. labor, and you look at the job market, people can't afford their quality of life. And like you say, people get stuck. I was raised here. This is the family house, et cetera, et cetera. There's an old saying, the person who loses least wins, right? So we've always been, as a culture, a last dollar in, right, kind of thought process. And I think people are going to become much more acute and need consultative support in figuring out what's the longitudinal, what's the return on the lifetime investment, and look at their housing situation in terms of their own personal use case adjusted for time.
David, I don't know. I mean, we could fight our entire lives and generations, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter what we get paid per hour, because if we're only focused on a paycheck, we're never going to make a life for ourselves. And, you talked about this piece of, these multiple streams of income and diversifying passive income streams. And it's not a necessity. I say it all the time. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. And that's a mindset shift where we almost have to and we have to make it. So like the UAW standing up, on strike, but all of it, when it comes down to it, being removed from everything on this side where I have this mindset shift. If we don't shift our mindset, we're going to keep constantly battling these same fights. You're never going to have a job that's going to pay you by the hour and then fulfill all these buckets in your life, right?
100 gajillion %. Right. So that's your question about how do you stop trying to sell your time for money?
Yeah.
And that is a toxic loop for clinicians, certainly. So I read job boards for fun. I read medical executive job boards, and routinely it's like 10 jobs in one, for which they pay you 60% of what you should get, right, for the one job. So for clinicians, there's a moral, ethical dilemma. You're supposed to give it 120% and totally dedicate yourself, within the context of your skill, and take everything you've got. Well, at some point, it's work not worth doing. Mm-hmm. Morally, ethically, pay it forward, karma wise, it's worth doing. But as a 1040 taxable income, it's totally not worth doing. And that's the story of nursing shortages. That all over the country, there's places that have a nursing shortage, and they wind up having to hire traveler temps, right, at 2.5 times what they were paying their staff, right, and have this endless loop. So yeah, I think it's really important from a creativity, self-fulfillment perspective for clinicians to be doing other things that generate passive income, that generate leverageable income, et cetera. And real estate is one of those places. You may not be able to do it all yourself. And, medical liability is a strange kind of thing. It really scares clinicians, so that they tend not to really be openly, deeply involved with their peers because they don't want to get dragged into somebody else's mess, right? Whereas business, well done, is entirely collaborative and entirely transparent. So what I see in the context of IT and transparency is people who have like interests coming together. And yeah, there's going to be some holding company, there's going to be some platform, people coming together within their lines of interest to invest their time and energy in real estate projects and participate in some way that's generating revenue for them. So classically, we're talking about clinical people investing in REITs, right? Or in hospitality companies. But what I would say for clinicians is study from your disease world context what you think represents happiness, quality of living, right? And, in this country, we've got a major, major mental health epidemic, right, that existed before COVID, right? We've got a lot of problems in that regard, and it's not just the senior population in that regard. But find the mechanics of investing some of your intellect, your human capital, right? And that can be evaluated also. So I do a lot of consulting for a lot of people, right? I've monetized my intellectual capital, right? So there are pathways to make money in that regard that are outside of the clinical venue where you make your W-2. But similarly in real estate, congregate, aggregate with peers or your social annex and think about real estate for its investment worthiness in multiple time horizons. It's not just about flipping property.
Yep. I call that kill and eat, those bubble capitals and putting in there. So I hear you say study your disease and kind of being from the outside, again, looking in, David, when you say study your disease, I'm almost hearing you speaking to the physicians in a way of look at the way that you're practicing medicine and just pick your head up, turn and put that in different platforms in real estate, different ventures, because you're picking up these pieces, these very unique experiences, unique knowledge capital, right, that you said, and that these little things can be implemented and applied in real estate.
Certainly in terms of environment, in terms of community. So I'll give you an example. Here's an epidemic. If we look at brain function or cognitive dysfunction, there are soft signs way before somebody forgets what their kids' names are, right? There are soft signs. And, your brain is a chemistry factory, right? It only makes sense that in that regard, it starts to uncouple or detune or become less efficient. People who understand behavioral health and neurology are genius at understanding environments, right? So, and I don't necessarily just mean the dementia village, right, which is a well-known phenomenon in Europe, but I'm in cardiovascular health, right? So I touch pulmonary, I touch diabetes, I touch kidney, et cetera. People who are in musculoskeletal and arthritis, right, and orthopedics see the world in a different kind of way as regards the person's day-to-day, moment-to-moment use case adjusted for real estate. So yeah, it's possible that Dr. Reis may be the interlocutor, right, for all of these folks. And again, anybody who's interested in real estate from a clinical discipline, reach out to me. Let's talk about how applicable you are. That's a derivation of people's clinical skills, right? From a community building perspective, the people who are in social work, right, have a keen understanding. The people who do mobile medical and visiting nurse kind of work have a keen perspective. So everything is up for grabs as regards the consumer, their use of the medical system, and how it applies to their quality of living in the what do I live in, where do I live, how long do I live there, what's my next move, right? Am I getting the most out of my monthly payment for my domicile in the context of quality of living. So we're at a very new beginning. And again, the IT and the metadata and the social media and the AI all come together in this soup of empowerment. The consumer is usually empowered to the point where a real estate professional can differentiate their intellect in the marketplace for the consumer to say, I like what you have to say, right? Mm-hmm. You're sharp. You understand me. Anybody can look at an MLS. Anybody can take somebody around. Anybody can push paper. Most anybody can negotiate. But to dig in on the use case, individualized for that person, right? Or that aggregate of people, those are special skills. And clinical people have that.
And to the beginning where you started in real estate, David, where was that? Where was the start? How did that come about?
Oh, yeah. So I had a really choppy start, right? So imagine, if you will, a national medical executive and interventional cardiologist. What did I know, right? So
you knew everything. You knew everything. This is not in real estate, right?
I didn't have it I didn't have everything deliverable yet.
Right.
So I went to a national and international firm, right? So you imagine, a heart doctor, Realtor. It's, perceptually, it's sort of a right. Yeah. I mean, and I had to explain to people why I was doing this. I had very big vision. So I joined a firm that ultimately was a franchise firm and ultimately had no ability to, a broker is not responsible for recognizing your intellectual capital. Okay. It's up to the agent to decide where they find the most fertile ground where they can be understood and manifest themselves. But I needed, at that time in my thought process, to land at a place that at least had a brand recognition. And I started off in New York City, right? Which is anomalous, I suppose you would say, because of the nature of the inventory and the nature of the consumer culture. So I needed to be with a brand. I stuck around way too long. And, I knew a lot of people, right? And the Dr. Reis thing really played, with a lot of essential people in that firm. But I was never able to find a collaborative matrix of people who say, great, you do that. This is what I do. Why don't we do those things together and try to make something of it? It didn't work at all. And I tried for 7.5 years. So the firm that you and I are at now seemed to me, from a systems perspective, because again, I came out of physiology, much more tuned in to talent, right? And in my Fortune 500 consulting, that was all talent management, right? So things are funny how they work out, and this is my clinical colleagues, dear colleagues. Everything is not just one thing. Okay. And you are not limited to doing that one thing. You never know along the journey where you're going to find kindred spirit, like mind, somebody who's traveled the path that you're thinking about traveling before, somebody who can, in confidence, help you externalize your thought process and do a little, challenge, accountability partner QA. Career development is highly personal and very, very intimate. And so I'm a Medicare recipient, though I look very young, right? So when I was in college or in medical school, if you switched schools, talk about perception. If you switch schools, everybody, what's wrong with that guy? Right. Something's wrong. And certainly if you left the industry, something's really wrong. We're in a completely different manner now. Now it's entirely about, am I satisfied? Am I fulfilled? Is my talent being optimized? Where's my career arc, so to speak? And where we're at now is much healthier, right? But again, to evolve, you need to collaborate and you need to have intimate trust with other people, because if you're, there's a saying, if you're in your head, you're dead. Right. That is sort of true. So ask another question. I'm enjoying our time together.
So this path, that was the one thing too, is like you mentioned earlier, your greatest achievement, you would say, was keep an open mind. And that open mind is allowing your yourself to see these opportunities as they come up. We've talked about being in the same company together, and that's how when I was reviewing a little before the show, is like we're so close, like we're literally one person away from each other. So it's very interesting. But that's a licensed real estate agent, and typically you'll see a licensed real estate agent basically from two worlds, in my perspective, is to do just that, to list and buy for other for clients, basically. And then there's the investor world, where it's, I did this because I'm an investor. So there's this opportunities that come from each side of it. But where did you walk into the agent world at? Were you listing for and acquiring for other people, or were you investing in real estate?
No, I was a standard grunt, right? A new licensee doing buy and sell.
Interesting.
I was always a person to be working in concentric harmonics. So while I was doing that work, I was always thinking about systems. But I'm a physiologist in medicine, so I'm an urban planner, right, in real estate. So New York was a good place for me. And I had worked with the Urban Land Institute, and I was on the board of directors of a philanthropy that was dealing with special needs kids. So, I was involved in New York City life, so to speak. But it's no secret that in the United States, our cities are having some challenges now. So this is what I mean. You never can tell where things lead you. It was a good thing, right, that I was commuting into New York City from Connecticut and working usual New York City buy, sell real estate. It allowed me to experience, from a systems perspective, New York City. Well, now I talk a lot about land use and agro living, right, and the beneficial effects of living in low density agricultural environments. So, to all my colleagues in real estate, no matter where you're at, the statistical likelihood that where you're at is where you're going to be, if your mind is open and you're motivated and you're trusting and you give to get, the chances that where you're at is where you're going to be are zero. Okay, because if you wind up where you're at in future, think you haven't grown at all. And we are in a remarkable sociologic time in this country where consumers are absolutely thinking about their use case and the healthfulness of their living, and certainly trying to figure out the work-life balance equation. So what I would say to all my real estate colleagues is be learned. And if you don't feel that you are, find people who are and associate with them. This is classically a relationship business. Even more so, this is a knowledge business, because the consumer needs you to help them understand what they're best to be thinking about above and beyond what they can think about on their own.
And this website that you have, the recareerdoctor.com, if someone is interested in kind of like that path towards becoming licensed, right, is a great place to go and check out. What else on this, I guess, the website, or do you do as a career doctor? Are you looking at different pieces of the real estate business, specifically helping people get into that path of becoming licensed, or what is the full path of the RE doctor, career doctor?
Right. So I've got two venues. They both have the same nomenclature. So my YouTube is RE Career Doctor. And in that space, very gently and kindly and calmly, with animation that's easy to digest, we bring up topics that should be on everybody's mind, but we're all so busy or defended or traumatized that we don't necessarily think about these things. So RE Career Doctor on YouTube is a peaceful, gentle place to come visit and see my mind. Right? RECareerDoctor.com is more directive in terms of dealing with content about the real estate business. But reach out to me. I'll speak to anybody
right? Hopefully people who reach out are sincere, right? Dedicated to their own selves and happiness. It takes a lot of guts to make changes.
Yeah.
Right? It's fill in the blank, scary, jarring, right? Fearsome, right? Whatever, being a clinician, people put a lot of rigor on themselves because it's a lot of responsibility. So that change, most people are pretty defended against, right? And, in speaking to physician owners of real estate about what's going on in that industry, what can I do? This is what I do, and I'll do it for as long as I can, right? And then I'll stop doing it. So there's a natural defensiveness about major species change, right? Right. I'm a clinician, but I'm also a real estate professional. My encouragement will be treat yourself to visioning, right? What it would be like to be multiple things and not just one thing. It's good for your head.
I would say too, I don't know what it's like, but I can see from the outside that change from career or from heart doctor to, I got the air quotes going on, Realtor, was this, a shot at your pride, right? You work so hard going through all of the schooling, all of the real world experience to get into this place where people's lives are online. And then, I could see it in your face. So you're saying, okay, then now I'm just a realtor, right?
I did both for 12 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So what I would say is in the US, we spend 18% of our gross domestic product on health related affairs. Maximally disintegrated line item, right? No leverage. That's what motivated me to go into real estate, because what I realized, and again, thank you, patent experience, right? Right. This is what I took away. What I recognized is we pay no attention systemically over what the quality of living effect is for all the things we do on the medical side, right? So we get people better and then we turn them back into their ambient environment, right? And it's that ambient environment and the lack of decision-making power, self-knowingness, optimism, or integration of resources, we totally fall off the cliff with that. And that's what I saw as being a systemic national and global real estate opportunity that I wanted to participate in. So I took on real estate with a very clinical mindset. So dear colleagues, you can too.
You can too. And if you could go back, say 15 years, what would be the first thing going through your mind that you wish you could tell yourself about 15 years ago, Dr. Reis?
Well, I'll tell a personal story, but don't tell anybody, audience.
Okay. Well, don't tell anybody.
Right. So in 1996, I wound up in a tax crunch, right? Because I did not allocate properly. I had to sell a huge position in Apple at $20 a share in 1996 because I screwed up. So when anybody says to me, "Can you turn back the clock?" That's my turn back the clock. I would have lived more simply. I wouldn't have over leveraged myself. I wouldn't have taken debt to afford my life. Right. Right. And I wouldn't have wound up in tax trouble. And that was merciless. That was very, very rough. Right. So imagine if I'd known what I'd known now about myself, about the world of business, right? You can't be random about you have to be engineered. You have to map things. You have to have you cannot let the chips fall where they may. And in our world today, it's obvious. So what my first mortgage was at 14%, wow. Right? But then of course, we modulated. We had a very long period of very low interest. Debt is bad. Don't do anything, okay, that requires that you take debt where you do not have an absolute surety, which doesn't exist, an absolute surety of appreciation,
such that you are leveraging somebody else's money. Okay. If you are taking debt to live, change your life. If you are taking debt to afford a house, right, get a different house, right? He who loses least wins, right? So I mention that because training in medicine is very long, and you've got this disconnect between your aspirations and what you think that life should be like in terms of rewards. Debt is bad. Real estate is good. Debt is bad.
This tax thing that popped in, we don't have to go all the way into it, but it just kind of jumps out. Was it from these capital bubbles that were created potentially by real estate, or was it something where
I was spending more than I could afford? I was working 24/7, 370. Right. I was working continuously, and the accommodation for that was to try to, live a larger life, right, for comfort. That was a mistake.
Was just kind of getting in at the income source, though. I wanted to pull that out of here. Because if you're on a W-2, you have taxes coming out already. I mean, if you have W-2 income, so
I was in solo practice, so that wasn't right. So it was a W-2 to myself.
Before it was even tax, because then tax is just a line item. And then if you're not intentional, if you're not thinking on paper, if you're not living in your means and preparing yourself for this, that's when that thing happens, Dr. Reis, where it's like, now what? And that's the worst case scenario, where you had to, what was it in 96, where you had to leverage, you had to liquidate something that looking back now would be worth, a lot of money. But I just wanted to pull that out of there, make sure that it's because some of us may be listening to that and say, well, how is that? How would you ever get in a tax problem? Right. Well, it's because in these different venues, these different avenues of income, they allow us the opportunity to basically have money at our hands without taxes taken out of it first.
Right. So since we're intimate, right, since we're all friends in the audience.
We're not telling anybody.
And since the audience is going to be calling me for career counsel, right, I'll share my intimacy. I got taken advantage of by a rogue trader, okay, who got me into options. I had no business being there at all. I was the typical hyper working Dr. Chump, right? And this guy ruined me. So all of that money that should have been in T-bills, right, waiting for tax day, I had with this guy trading options in my, what a mess. So that's my personal story. So feel free to call me with yours.
Yes. Interesting. Wow. That's also another great thing to share, kind of, here in the end, kind of turning this thing around, wrapping it up. But it's like, even the best of us, very well educated, very well experienced, we all have these moments of pain that now just sharing them, now that we're, intimate and sharing them with everybody, maybe that can give somebody else that heads up. Oh, wait a second. I've got my tax money in over here while I'm waiting for my tax bill. What if I lose that? Then what? Right. So I think that's just a great opportunity to share that.
That's right. So, there's a saying, save one life, save the world. Right. Yeah. So, I hope that someone listening to this says, you know what? I'm not stuck. I am the master of my own destiny. Yes, I don't have to think that the job defines me, right? Which is a classic, at least in my generation, mind bender, right? So multi-careerism for the creative mind, 100 gajillion%. You got to have friends. You have to have intimate trust. Don't be in your own head. But absolutely, if you look at national living, if you look at international living, if you have someone of seniority in your constellation and you're advocating for them, or you're in midlife trying to figure things out, or you're in new beginnings, absolutely think about what makes you happy and let that be your North Star.
Well, what makes me happy today, Dr. Reis, is having you here on the show today. And I really appreciate your time and sincerely, man, thank you for your time. And this is something that makes me happy. It fills my happy bucket.
Maybe we helped somebody today. So you can find me at recareerdoctor.com. You can visit with me
at YouTube, RE Career Doctor. And my email is my name, david.reis@yourdoseofrealty.com. So you're like the possessive, dose like a medication of realty, a play on reality. It's not your dose of reality, though you need a heavy dose of reality. It's your dose of realty. So Brett, it's great to see you.
Yes, great to see you too. And thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.